Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'm going to be covering the weather for April 4th into April 5th because I won't be able to make a forecast for tomorrow most likely. But before I do start with the weather here, I would like to say that confidence in today's forecast is very, very uncertain. Again, I do, and I'm not a trained meteorologist, and I'm doing this to learn about meteorology and to really improve as I go on. So, confidence for me is fairly low today. Uh, so what we're currently looking at right here is a slight risk area for central Texas and parts of southern Oklahoma, as well as a marginal threat along that going through much of the Midwest into parts of southern South Dakota. And if we look at our hazard threat that they are issuing from this SPC, we do have a very tiny 5% chance for tornadoes, as well as a 2% chance around that. And again, there is a threat for isolated winds, as well as a hail threat and a potentially significant hail threat for the area down through southern Texas, where we're seeing, I think, more instability than the further north, but then also a significant hail threat for the tornado affected area. The cause of the tornado affected area is fairly low today for me, and I think also the possibility of what's happening for today is also fairly low for the CP storm for the Storm Prediction Center as well. They have changed the thing several times today, and it was a I think 2% chance to start off with, then increased to a 5% chance, then decreased back down to a 2% chance, and then increased back to a 5% chance. And I think mostly because of that, it's because of the storms from yesterday that were in the Texas Panhandle have moved eastward and is kind of redeveloped a little bit along the outflow there, and intensified, and has kind of messed with the atmosphere a little bit and the overall severe potential. But let's take a look at the cloud cover or lapse rates first. First, let's take a look at the lapse rates, and you can see that there's not really too good of a lapse rate, but earlier today there were pretty decent lapse rates in some areas with 8. But fairly moderate lapse rates, very mid lapse rates throughout much of Texas, and this seems to decrease. Let's take a look at the cloud cover. Let's take a look at the cloud cover. Where is it? I know it's somewhere. Cloud cover here. So if we're looking at the cloud cover, we can actually notice that there is a large amount of cloud cover for much of Texas, an area that's affected, and that could potentially affect storm development due to the lack of surface heating from these clouds. But those seem to clear out the area by Friday. That get blown away by a little trough here, actually. Let's take a look at the mid-level winds, because lower level winds are actually not really strong. It's mostly mid-level winds. You can see a small shortwave trough being ejected out of Mexico here through Texas, That's going to be our driving factor for the severe weather today, and what's going to push on the moisture in Texas and create what is expected to be a dry line through much of Texas and initiate severe weather. Let's take a look at the. Let's actually go out into a more less in less of a high resolution thing, so I can actually get into the upper regions of the atmosphere, and then let's also go to let's zoom out a little bit to the entire United States. Okay, so what we're looking at here is this low pressure system here, this low here, and that low cyclone that was situated pretty much stationary over much of the Northeast has moved eastward, taking with it very strong mid-level winds, upper-level winds, and low-level winds. It was very windy through Tennessee, where we were getting hit by much of the trough because of those winds. But that we still have that low-pressure system. It's not as strong as this one over here was, but it's causing it moving south, and this low pressure system moving out of the area here is causing this high pressure system here to move eastward and pretty much prevent or slowly destroy the omega block here that's been protecting the United States from severe weather the past few days. So we still have that low pressure system here that is ejecting you see this trough here, and then ahead of it a very modest shortwave trough moving through Mexico, subtropical trough just ahead of the trough that is associated with this low pressure system. Again, it's going to be our driving factor for these storms. But let's take a look at upper level winds too. You can see that there are fairly weak upper level winds associated with that trough that really only increased by Saturday and Sunday through the Midwest, and with that trough that we're seeing over here, low pressure trough situated right here, fairly weak upper level winds along that trough, and that shortwave trough that we saw here to begin with, there's pretty much you cannot see it at all. But let's take a look at the lower level winds now. So you can see, let's give it a minute to load. There's still that low pressure system here, and the shortwave trough that is being ejected at just ahead of it, with fairly decent low-level winds being ejected through Texas that could be sufficient for potential tornado development. But let's take a look at the shear here. Let's take a look at the wind shear. Let's actually go to more of a let's go to a increased view. So it's not surface. Let's go from 1 kilometer instead of 0 from surface to 500, and let's go into more zoomed in view here down on the area that we're going to be focusing on today. So you can see that there is the potential for strong low-level shear through the area that is affected for or expected for the potential for tornadoes, as well as weaker and low-level shear. Let's go for a whole view of the atmosphere here. with the shear, which will include upper level shear. There isn't really there are some areas where upper level shear or entirety is more intense. That's likely just due to contamination because of storm development here on Friday. But you can still see that there is very modest upper level shear because we didn't really see it. We didn't really see that on much of the area down through there. It was very modest to weak through much of Texas. But so it's most likely going to be more upper level through Texas, likely not causing much of a tornado potential. But again, very higher end wind shear through that tornado risked area, that surface the or low level wind shear that could potentially allow for tornadic development. But let's take a look at the instability, which I usually start off with earlier in the videos here, but I haven't this video. But you can see that there is a very modest to higher end instability toward further south that could allow for large hail to develop, especially through that we saw that there was an increased risk for a risk for significant hail through that area where there's where Cape is expected to be higher up on the spectrum, but towards the area where we're seeing where we saw the potential tornado potential in that 5% area, there is it's very moderate, to potentially low end Cape for the 5% risk. So because of the low end Cape, tornado development is if there is any rotating supercells, I would assume for them to be brief, very brief, due to the limited instability. But we did see the more increased wind shear in that area. So the potential, I mean, it could allow it to drive along, but then we also saw the trough that was moving through, that it could potentially allow for it to drive along any tornadoes that could develop. But me personally, I don't think it would really allow for it to really drive on. I think any tornadoes that potentially develop are going to be fairly short-lived because of limited Cape. But let's take a look at the moisture in the atmosphere, actually. Dew point. Let's go to dew point. Okay, so you can see by the late afternoon into Friday, the strong southwesterly flow from the trough here has caused a dry line to develop for between well, first you can probably notice that excuse me, but before we get into the dry line, you can see that moisture has returned to much of the Midwest, as far with dew points as far north as Kansas, through Oklahoma and through much of central to eastern Texas, as well as dew points in the 70s through eastern Texas and South Texas, that just continue to increase. And you can see another potential another strong dry line developing on Friday, and I'll likely cover that in a few minutes. It depends, but for today now, you can see a strong southwesterly flow, developing a dry line here, where dew points are high or more increased, and more of a stronger dry line between dew points that are in the 40s and 30s, straight into dew points that are in the 60s, with not as much of a gradient between moderate dew points in the 50s to 60, going to 60 dew points with 30s and 40s on one side. Instead, it's going straight from 60s to from 60s to from 30s and 40s straight to 60s here, with that increased or the more intense dry line. There could be a little bit of a driving factor for tornadic development, because it's more intense. But overall, again, it's a 5% chance, and the SPC and me have been fairly uncertain the past few days about what's really going to go on today. But my conclusion is that I can take away from this, again, I've been fairly uncertain, and I'm not a trained meteorologist, which is why I'm doing these videos to improve at weather, as well as warn you guys. But my conclusion and what I can take away from this, and what you guys should take away from this if you live in this area, is that there could be the potential for large to very large hail along that dry line, especially further down south, where there could be there could be more increased not lapse rates, but cape, more instability, allowing for larger hail, but there could be a small tornado potential for this area of Oklahoma, where the wind shear is more increased, and the dry line is more increased too. And all the severe weather is going to be driven by but it's going to be the shortwave trough that's moving out of Mexico, mid-level trough, and there could be the potential for a few scatter. The thunderstorm threat is mostly going to be isolated, and there could be the potential for damaging winds, isolated hail, isolated damaging winds, and the potential for an isolated tornado, a small potential for an isolated tornado through that Oklahoma area that I showed you a few minutes ago. So please check out the socials for Project Gladiator, and I will see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.